I guess about this one. Extant creatures so bizarre they look fake by Spinosnack.
These are prehistoric creatures that should not exist. Let's start with something that looks like someone pulled a lizard's neck like taffy and forgot to stop. So there's this creature called the Tanystropheus, and the first thing you need to know is that its neck was 3 meters long. That's about 10 feet for our American friends out there, which would be fine, except the neck was half of its entire body.
I think we've seen this one in a video before, yeah. Insane. Just a weird design.
Length. The other half was just a normal stubby reptile body, like someone built a lizard, got bored halfway through, and they just kept adding neck. Now here's where it gets worse. That 3-meter mech only had 13 bones in it. For reference, you have 7 bones in your neck. Giraffes have 7. This thing had 13, but they were stretched out so far the whole neck was basically stiff, so it couldn't really turn its head. Just had this long rigid pole sticking out of its
I mean, I think the other video we had seen was saying that like it's good for fishing. They stand at the water edge and extend their neck and just above the water and just dive in.
Body that it had to drag around everywhere. Scientists have looked at this thing for years and they couldn't figure out what it was doing. Some thought it lived on land, some thought it lived in the water, but nobody could agree because the whole design just made no sense. And then they did some more research and found out it was a fish eater, which actually explains a lot. See, Tanystropheus would hang out in shallow water and just stay completely still. Its body would be hidden under the surface and it'd stick out that ridiculous neck out towards fish. The fish wouldn't see it coming because the neck was so thin and the head was so small, and then boom, Tanystropheus would snap its jaws shut, and then that was lunch. So this thing basically turned itself into a biological fishing pole, which works great in water. On land though, it was just walking around with a 10-foot neck that couldn't really bend, which is absolutely terrible design for literally anything else. And that's probably why it's not around anymore. Let's move on though. When you think about it, most creatures that can fly use their front limbs. This creature said they're not going to do that. Birds use their front limbs to fly, bats use their front limbs to fly, pterosaurs use their front limbs to fly. Every single flying thing uses its front limbs for wings because that's just how flying works. Except Chiropteryx looked at that and decided to do the complete opposite. This thing had wings on its back legs. Not its front legs, but its back legs. The membrane stretched between its hind legs and tail and made a triangle shape. Scientists call it a delta wing because it looked kind of like a paper airplane. And its front legs were tiny and basically useless for flying. So when this thing glided through the air, it was doing it backwards, with its front half just hanging, with its back half doing all the work. And look, there's only one fossil of this thing. Just one. It was found in Kyrgyzstan and it's about 225 million years old, so we can't be totally sure how well this design worked. The fossil has impressions of the wing membrane on it, so we know the...
I mean, I guess it is true that there's still there's like some birds today or some things that, you know, have wings, but they can't really fly well, so it's possible it also couldn't fly well.
Back leg wings were real. This isn't a mistake. This thing really was built like that. The way it probably worked is Chiropteryx would climb up a tree or a cliff, spread its back legs out into a triangle, and then jump. And the triangle would catch air and it'd glide down. Little front limbs might have helped with steering, or maybe they didn't. It's hard to say. The main thing is that this animal's gliding around with its wings on the wrong end of its body. No other animal in the history on Earth has ever done anything like this. Nothing alive today does it, nothing extinct does it. Just Chiropteryx. It tried this wild experimental design for a few million years and then went extinct and nobody ever tried it again. This is the fearsome Corgosaurus Rex. His name is Flapjack. And if you don't like and subscribe, he literally is going to eat you. Look at his face. This is a fearsome apex predator from the prehistoric period. You don't want to mess with him. And speaking of flying, you usually need feathers to fly. Well, before feathers existed, this lizard already had them. So Longisquama was a little lizard that lived about 235 million years ago, which is pretty normal so far, except it had these long scales growing out of its back that looked exactly like feathers. But feathers didn't exist yet. Birds weren't even around. So this thing had 6 or more of these structures just sticking up from its spine. Each one could be as long as the entire lizard. When scientists first found this thing in 1970, they didn't really know what to do with it. Some people said maybe these are early feathers, maybe this creature is related to birds, and that started a whole debate that's still going on today. But most scientists now think these weren't feathers at all. They were just scales that happen to look a lot like feathers, which somehow makes it weirder. The current idea is that Longosquama use these things for showing off. You know how peacocks have those big fancy tails? Well, same concept here, except Longosquama.
It does seem pretty impractical though, like you would get catched on a lot of things, or like predator would easily bite into it and catch you. It seems kind of useless.
Had these long plume things on its back, and it was living in the Triassic period when nothing else was doing that. So it probably climbed around in trees with these 6 giant scales, waving around trying to impress other Longosquamas. Also a chance it used them to glide short distances. Maybe it could spread them out and parachute down the trees. But they weren't real wings. They were just decorative scales that maybe caught some air. The whole thing is bizarre because this wasn't part of any major evolutionary lineage. It didn't lead to anything. Birds evolved feathers completely separately. Longosquama just showed up in the Triassic with fake feathers, existed for a while, and then disappeared. No descendants, no legacy. Just a weird little lizard that decided to grow feather-looking scales for no reason that matters today. So decorative scales are one thing, but a tree chameleon with a hook for a hand is different. Trypanosaurus lived in trees during the late Triassic, and it had a tail that could wrap around branches. It could grip stuff, it could climb around, which was all normal chameleon behavior. And then you look at its hands, and then you notice something's very wrong. One finger on each hand grew into this massive curved claw. Just one. The other fingers were tiny and useless, so it's got these 2 giant hooks where its hands should be. Each claw was thick and powerful and shaped kind of like the tool you would use to open a can. Actually, that's what paleontologists call it, a can opener claw. Now you're probably thinking, well, there's no cans back then, what was this thing?
It was opening its food. Interesting. Even the shape is kind of weird, like what is that little bump on the back? Like a camel or dromedary.
Opening, and that answer is bark. Trypanosaurs would hang out in trees and just rip apart the bark looking for insects. It'd hook its claw into a piece of wood and tear it open and eat whatever bugs were hiding inside. Its bones were really strong too. They were built to handle all of that ripping and tearing. Its tail also had this weird looking hook thing at the end. It was extra vertebrae that formed a second claw situation, so it could wrap its tail around a branch, hang there upside down, and use both hands to destroy some bark. It had free hands.
It frankly seems pretty OP, this one, I don't know. Like, I'm guessing it probably died in the evolutionary line or something, but the tail to like hook around and almost like swing like a chimpanzee of trees, right? Then, you know, small fingers for like delicate matters, one big one to like tear apart stuff. I don't know. It seems kind of well designed.
Hands because the tail's doing the holding. It's a pretty smart setup actually. The first fossils that they found were just fragments, and a paleontologist looked at the huge claw and the weird tailbones and said he couldn't even picture what this animal looked like. It took more complete fossils to figure it out, and when they put it all together, it was just this slow little tree lizard that spent its whole life hanging around and ripping wood apart for food. Nothing alive today does this exact thing. Anteaters exist, but they're on the ground. Woodpeckers exist, but they use their beaks. The Trypanosaurs combined both of the ideas and did it in the trees 210 million years ago. Now that's weird, but let's talk about a dinosaur where scientists didn't get it right the first time. When they first found Adipod dentatus, they thought its mouth was split vertically down the middle. They thought it had 2 rows of teeth meeting in a zipper. Nobody had ever seen that before, because it doesn't exist, because they got it completely wrong. The fossils were crushed and broken and hard to piece together, so they did their best and published this reconstruction showing a marine reptile with a zipper mouth, and everyone looked at it and thought they can't be right. But those were the fossils that they had, so that's what they published. Then in 2016, they found better specimens, more complete skulls, and it turned out the mouth wasn't split at all. It was just smashed weird in the first fossils. What it actually had was a hammerhead-shaped snout. It was wide and flat across the front, with 2 sets of teeth with completely different jobs. The front edge of the hammerhead had chiseled teeth. They were flat and—
How does evolution even decide to make an hammerhead? Like, I know there's shark. Is there any other animals today that have some kind of hammerhead design? And how does evolution even decide that you need an hammerhead? Because you don't actually use it like an hammer anyway? What's the benefit of an hammerhead design?
good for scraping. Adapona dentatus would swim up to a rock
scrape.
covered in algae and press its face against it. Then it would
Thanks for-
scrape
I'm
the
sorry.
chisel teeth along the surface and strip all of the plants off, just mowing that algae right off the rock. After it scraped up a mouthful of plant mush and water, it would close its jaws. Then the second set of teeth were these long needles lining the sides of its mouth. Water would filter out through the gaps and the needle teeth would trap all the algae inside. It was a built-in strainer. This thing was 3 meters long and lived 244 million years ago. It is actually the first known plant-eating
design.
marine reptile, and we only figured that out 8 years ago because the first fossils looked like a zipper monster. The name means unique arrangement of teeth, which is really inaccurate, but they named it that when they thought it had a zipper mouth. So the name's right for the wrong reasons, even though it still has quite a strange mouth setup. And speaking of weird look,
I'm surprised, like, such crazy teeth, and all you do is eat algae. That's kind of crazy.
looking sharp, pointy things like teeth, there's a dinosaur with claws longer than swords. Therizinosaurus was a theropod, which is the same group that includes the T-Rex and Velociraptor, the meat eaters, the predators, and Therizinosaurus had the longest claws of any animal that has ever lived. They were nearly 70 centimeters long, which is
Have you ever seen some of those fashionable women and their fake nails? I think they would beat up this thing.
over 2 feet. Each claw was as long as a baseball bat. But here's the
Okay,
thing,
maybe
they ate
not.
plants. When they first found the claws in the 1940s, they thought they belonged to a giant turtle because nothing else made sense to have claws this big. It actually took decades before they found the rest of the skeleton. And when they put it together, everyone realized this was a dinosaur that broke every rule. It was huge. In fact, it was over 7 meters long, weighed about 5 tons, but instead of being
What
fast
the
and
fuck?
sleek, it was slow and pot-bellied.
That's big.
It had a long neck with small teeth, and its teeth were shaped for eating leaves. The whole thing just looked wrong. It was basically a theropod that gave up hunting and just started eating salads. In fact, those giant claws weren't for killing. They were for pulling branches down, reaching up into trees and hooking the foliage and dragging it close enough to eat. And maybe for defense. If a Tarbosaurus showed up looking for a meal, Therizinosaurus could swing those claws and do some serious damage. Probably. This is highly debated, and it's not well known if these were in fact incredibly sharp or if they were super brittle. It might have had feathers too. Some of its relatives have
What a
been found
weird
with
one.
feathers, so picture a 5-ton pot-bellied dinosaur covered in feathers with giant hook claws just slowly wandering around eating leaves. That's Therizinosaurus. It's basically a giant murder chicken. The name means scythe lizard because the claws look like scythes, which are farming tools. It's
But I mean, if it's only eating leaves, how does it even survive at that size? Seriously. I mean, I guess there was a bunch of other like massive, like the Diplodocus and stuff like that, right? They were absolutely massive and herbivore, but man, I never understand how they survive just eating leaves.
pretty accurate. This thing was basically a gardener, just a really big one with weapons for hands, and it survived until the end of the Cretaceous doing this, by being a giant peaceful plant eater in a family full of killers. If you think that's odd, wait until you see the dinosaur that tried to be a
Spinosaurus is pretty well known, no? Wasn't there some in Jurassic Park?
crocodile. Spinosaurus is the biggest carnivorous dinosaur that has ever existed. It was longer than T-Rex and heavier too, and it spent most of its time in the water eating fish, which dinosaurs weren't really supposed to do. Everything about this is wrong for a dinosaur. It had a crocodile skull. It was long and narrow with conical teeth, perfect for catching slippery prey. Its back legs were short, and they were not built for running on land. And then there's the tail. In 2020, they found tail fossils that showed it actually has a paddle. Yes, an actual fin for swimming, which is the first dinosaur that has ever been found to have that. The sail on its back was also huge. Some of the spines were over a meter tall, sticking.
It's in the second Jurassic Park, I think, or maybe the third one, the one where like some stupid family like want to go to the island for some reason for their kid. And what I know that, you know, only the first Jurassic Park movie is really loved. I personally do love that one too, the one with the stupid family. And I always remember like the scene when they're on the boat and you can see the, you know, the fin coming out, or like the one where like the Spinosaurus is actually like out of the water and it's on the other side of the fence and it looks absolutely terrifying. Even though I think that representation wasn't quite how they look. Great movie. When I was young, I was very scared.
Straight up. It could have been used for temperature control, could have been used for showing off to other Spinosauruses. It could have helped it stay stable in the water. Nobody's totally sure, but it was definitely there and it was definitely massive. Here's what probably happened. Spinosaurus would wade into rivers and swamps and use the paddle tail to swim around. Its nostrils were high up on its snout, so it could breathe while most of its head was underwater, and it would hunt giant fish. We know there were huge fish in its environment, some as big as cars. So Spinosaurus would snap them up in its crocodile jaws, and that was dinner. It might have walked on all fours in shallow water too. The limb proportions are weird enough that some scientists think it spent time on 4 legs, which is wild because theropods don't usually do that. They found the first Spinosaurus fossils in 1912, but it took over 100 years to figure out it was actually a swimming dinosaur. Early reconstructions just showed it standing upright with a sail, normal theropod dinosaur stuff. Now we know it was doing something no other big dinosaur did, living in the water. So dinosaurs doing weird stuff is one thing, but the pterosaurs took it further. You know what's really weird? Flying reptiles. Pterosaurs. Fine, we accept that, we've heard of it by now. And then you got Nyctosaurus, which had a head crest longer than its entire body, shaped like antlers. Why? Just why? Well, this thing's wingspan was about 2 meters, which is a normal size for a pterosaur, but the crest on the back...
Like, it's another thing that, you know, makes you think AI, right? Like it's such a design decision that seems to make no sense. You just think, yeah, why?
Back of its skull was nearly 2 feet tall. It had 2 long bony spines forming a Y shape, one going straight up and one going back, and it was just bone. No membrane, no skin flap, just 2 giant antlers sticking off of its head while it tried to fly around. Scientists thought maybe there was a sail stretched between the prongs, you know, at least that would make some sense and give it a purpose. But the evidence says no, it was just bare bone. An ornament, dead weight, something it had to carry around for no practical reason. So why have it then? The best guess is showing off. Mating displays. Look at my giant head antlers, I'm clearly...
It's really one of these things where, like, the evolution of showing off mechanics in animals and dinosaurs and everything is pretty interesting. Some of them look actually cool, you know, and some of them, like this, is like, yeah, like there was a bug in the evolution. But you know, if it works, if, like, you know, the same species actually saying this is cool, if it works, it works. But this seems highly unpractical to live with. I mean,
the best Nyctosaurus. All the ladies would see these things from far away and make their choice. Or it helped with species recognition. Hey, that's another Nyctosaurus. I can tell by the ridiculous antlers, I'm gonna hang out with them. The rest of it was pretty normal. It was toothless, streamlined, and it flew over warm seas and caught fish, which is pretty standard pterosaur behavior. The whole time it's got this massive forked crest catching wind and adding drag and making everything harder. And it worked, but it shouldn't have. They survived for millions of years with these things, so clearly it wasn't that bad to have. The mating advantage must have been worth it. Evolution decided that having a huge flat...
The bigger the better, I guess. Maybe, you know, some things never change. It's all about how big it is, you know. The lady loves you if it's big, it is what it is. Damn it, even the time of dinosaurs were like this. Damn it.
Flashy billboard on your head was more important than being aerodynamic. In fact, there were lots of pterosaurs with crests. Pterodon had one, but Nyctosaurus took it to a level that just seems excessive. Nobody else went that far. But at least it could actually fly though. Now let's talk about the creature that people once confused for a snake, but was actually a whale. They found these bones in Alabama in the 1800s. It had a long vertebrae, really long. In fact, it was stretched out way more than normal. And at first they thought it was a sea serpent, a giant marine reptile. That's why they call it Basilosaurus, which means king lizard. Except it wasn't a lizard. It was a whale that was 60 feet long and shaped like a snake, which is not how whales are supposed to be shaped. Modern whales are thick, stocky, and powerful. Basilosaurus was thin and bendy and moved through the water by wiggling its whole body, like a snake. But if you looked closely, you would see that it still had tiny back legs. They were useless for walking, but they were still there, a leftover from when whales lived on land. You could look at a Basilosaurus skeleton and see the little leg bones just hanging off the back, half doing nothing. Evolution hadn't gotten rid of them yet. The skull was narrow and filled with sharp teeth. It ate fish and sharks and smaller whales. There's fossil stomach contents that prove this. It was a top predator 40 million years ago in the Eocene, swimming around in warm shallow seas, just being 60 feet of serpent whale. Instead of using a tail fluke to swim, it undulated. It moved its whole spine side to side, more like an eel than like a dolphin. The vertebrae were dense and heavy to help with buoyancy. It probably swam slow most of the time and then struck fast when something got close. People in Alabama used to think the fossils were from sea monsters. They would find these huge bones and not know what they were looking at, and honestly they weren't that far off. A 60-foot serpent whale is pretty close to a sea monster. Took a while before scientists realized this was actually a mammal though, that it breathed air, that it was related to modern whales, because nothing about the shape made sense for a whale. And speaking of things that don't make any sense, there's a camel that used to be out there that had a trunk. Charles Darwin found Macrauchenia fossils in 1834, and this is a guy who saw a lot of weird animals. He spent years traveling around looking at strange creatures. In fact, this was the one that made him go, I don't know what I'm looking at. It had a long neck, long legs, and looked kind of like a llama or a camel at first glance. It was built for running across open plains, but then you get up to the skull and the nostrils are way up high between the eyes, not at the end of the snout where they should be. In fact, they're on top of its head. That means it probably had a short trunk, not elephant-sized, more like a tapir. Just a flexible nose it could use to grab leaves or strip bark, and nobody expected that because this thing wasn't related to elephants at all. It was a completely different branch of mammals that evolved in South America, while that continent was isolated for millions of years. Everything about Macrauchenia confused scientists. Was it related to camels? No. Horses? Not really. Rhinos? Also no. It took until 2016 before they did protein analysis and figured out it was distantly related to horses and rhinos, but split off right when the dinosaurs died out. So it had 65 million years of separate evolution, and it survived until about 10,000 years ago, and it lived alongside giant ground sloths and saber-toothed cats, and probably traveled in herds, and it would use those long legs to run away from predators, and maybe use the
like aside of the face, it is fairly normal looking. I mean, it's not that weird.
Trunk to communicate or to pull down branches other herbivores couldn't reach. The name means long llama, which is accurate for the body but completely ignores the whole trunk situation. And honestly, that's the most interesting part. This was a hoofed animal with a trunk that's not an elephant wandering around South America until quite recently. Humans might have even seen these things before they went extinct. Now, trunks are weird, but at least they're small. Unlike one elephant's jaw. Take an elephant, now flatten its lower jaw into a shovel shape. Put two wide tusks on the shovel pointing forwards. That's Platybilodon. This thing lived 15 to 20 million years ago, and it was about the size of a large hippo, and had a normal-ish elephant body with a short trunk. And then you get to the mouth, and it's just wrong, because the lower jaw stuck straight out. It was flattened.
That's like the two teeth of the actually meme.
Wide, and there was two tusks on the end that were shaped like curved blades laying sideways. Early scientists thought it lived in swamps, scooping up mud and plants, using the shovel jaw to dig into lake beds and dredging up food. There were even illustrations showing it worked like a backhoe, and that made sense given what it looked like, but they were wrong. Wear patterns on the tusks show it was actually cutting vegetation. It would clamp that shovel jaw around branches and yank. The sharp edges of the tusks would slice through soft wood and bark. The upper and lower teeth worked together like scissors. Snipping reeds, stripping trees, just mowing through plants. The front edges of the tusks are worn down and polished. You can see where they rubbed against stuff over and over. So it wasn't scooping, it was cutting. The whole mouth was a plant processing tool. Platybilodon lived in Asia, Africa, and Europe. Fossils of it are pretty common. It was a successful animal for several million years, and then around 10 million years ago it went extinct. More normal-looking elephants and mammoths.
It's a bit freaky looking. Yeah.
Turns out you don't need a shovel mouth to succeed as an elephant. When people first saw the fossils, they thought it was a joke. The jaws looked fake. They were too ridiculous to be real. But there are enough specimens that we have found that we know it was real. Evolution just tried out this design for a while, and then moved on. Now, two weird tusks is nothing compared to four horns that don't really make any sense. Arsenopitherium had two giant horns on its nose, each one about 2 feet long, and then two smaller knobs on its forehead above the eyes. Four horns in total. It looked like a rhinoceros, and it was about the same size. It moved like a rhino, acted like a rhino, but it wasn't a rhino. It wasn't even close. What was it then? Well, this thing belonged to its own group of mammals that's completely extinct now. It has no living relatives. Well, maybe elephants and manatees if you go really, really far back, but even that's a stretch. Arseniotherium was basically alone on its own branch of the family tree. It lived 30 to 36 million years ago in North Africa, back when that area was tropical and swampy, and it weighed about 2 tons, ate plants, and probably hung out near water. And it used those big horns for defense and for fighting other Arseniotheriums.
Yeah,
the horns were real bone covered in keratin. Not
pretty
like
metal
rhino horns,
design.
which are all keratin. These had a bony core, and they were more permanent and couldn't break off. Males probably locked horns and shoved each other around to see who was stronger. And any predator trying to attack would have to get past 2 giant spikes. There weren't many predators big enough to threaten a full-grown Arseniotherium anyway. Maybe large creodonts, maybe big crocodiles, but not much else. The horns were probably more for competing with each other than for actual defense because of its size. In fact, when scientists first found it, they didn't know what to do with it because they couldn't fit it into any existing group. It was just this horned herbivore that didn't match anything else, and they still don't really have a good answer because it's an evolutionary dead end. A unique experiment that worked for a few million years and then disappeared. It was named after an Egyptian queen, but the animal itself seems more like something from mythology. And those are just some of the prehistoric creatures out there that should not exist because they are so damn strange. If you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to give it a like and comment down below.
I do like the concept of the dinosaurs or animals that just had this very weird evolution. I mean, today I think like what most people know today is the panda, right? So if we didn't try to keep them alive, they would be extinct. And at the same time, there's been a lot throughout history, right? Clearly, like this one, right? There's been so much throughout history, but like the design just didn't work enough for it to survive. And panda is kind of like that right now, except we are here, and so we have the ability to make sure that it doesn't go extinct. Otherwise, it would already be extinct. It's pretty interesting. Hello. It makes you think. I'm sure there must be like some other like species today that are kind of like that, where they're just not really like apt for surviving. And I'm talking about like less because of us and what we're doing, but even like as they are in nature, they are doomed to be extinct if we don't intervene, like we have with panda. It is pretty interesting.